Hello, everyone. Hi, Crystal. Thanks for doing that. Sorry, I didn't give you a heads up. Hi, everyone. I am Archery Arbery Barabo, and I'm the West Eugene Community Organizer for Beyond Toxics. I would like to thank Councilor Claire Syrett and Councilor Randy Groves for joining us tonight. Councilor Syrett is a councilor of Ward 7 in Eugene. This ward includes Train Song, Whitaker, River Road, and Santa Clara neighborhoods. She's here tonight to discuss plans for moving forward with the 3 work sessions that were voted on unanimously by the City Council. These include the need for a public health overlay zone, risk bonds, and tackling chronic polluters. Councilor Randy Groves is a councilor for Ward 8 in West Eugene, and we're really happy that he's here tonight as well. He's a former fire chief and is very knowledgeable about pollution and hazardous chemicals and their health impacts. He's also here to discuss ways he as a council member can help support the people of West Eugene. We're also joined by Laura Allen from the Sustainability Commission. Laura is an author and educator with a focus on sustainable water systems. She's been a member of the Eugene Sustainability Commission for the past 3 years. She also works with Lane Community College's Water Conservation Technician Program and the nonprofit Gray Water Action. She's here to discuss what a risk bond is and how it can help communities living around chronic polluters. And last, but certainly not least, our very own Lisa Arkin, Executive Director of Beyond Toxics. Lisa has a deep knowledge of all environmental justice and a long history of bringing an equity perspective to local and state environmental policy. She will be here to understand. She will be here to explain to us exactly what a health overlay zone is. Before we get right on started with Lisa, there will be time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you do have questions before that, you're welcome to put those in the chat. In order to find the chat, you go down to that More button down at the bottom of your screen, right next to the Leave button. Don't push Leave or you'll be out of here. So it's the More button right down there. You push that and you'll see Chat. Go ahead and push on that chat. It'll bring up for you to be able to put your questions in there. And as they're coming in, we will try to keep an eye on those questions to make sure you have those answered to the best of our ability towards the end. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to kick it off with Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you, Audrey. And I'm the first presenter because I'm going to share a little bit about the history of Bethel and Train Song neighborhoods. And I'm calling it A Tale of Two Cities. I'm going to share my screen here. Here we go. See if that works. Okay. And the reason I'm so interested in sharing this with everyone tonight is because I think it's important to know where we've been so we know how we got to where we are today, and then how to plan for the future, how to make it better. So I've never given this presentation before. I've been thinking about it for months, like, oh, there's so much we can learn about our own community. And so here we go. You're the first to see this. So did you know that then back in the day, Bethel used to have the Bethel Stadium, and it was the home of the Larks Minor League baseball team. We'll talk more about that later, but now where that stadium was is the site of Lark Park, which is on the north side of Roosevelt Avenue. And I think you can see the connection there between the Larks baseball team and Lark Park. Did you know there was a Flying Scot restaurant on Highway 99? And it was really the favorite hangout for all the teens. And now it's the site of an auto junkyard. Did you know there were grocery markets along Highway 99 and River Road and in Train Song neighborhood? And now there are no grocery stores in those areas, but we have a lot of AM, PM, Jiffy Marts or Quickie Marts and 7-Elevens where you can get Slurpees and Twinkies. Did you know that there was something called a Bethel School located in the Train Song community? And now that school has been torn down and the land was converted to industrial uses. Did you know there were homes and schools and farms before there were heavy industry? And then in the 1980s, industry gave the input, which decided Bethel's fate. We'll talk more about that. And Bethel had a lot of historic buildings, homes that were built in the 1800s or early 1900s, and remarkable farms with so much produce from hops to filberts to berries. And now there's only one designated historic landmark designated for West Eugene. And so I pulled up this map from the Eugene City website. They have like a historical landmark preservation division there. And you can see all the little red triangles indicate where there is a designated historic site. Many of them are on the National Register of Historic Locations. You can see them clustered there, but there's only one way off up past River Road here, if you can see my cursor, and up past the railroad. And yet when I was digging around, I found many photographs, old photographs of gorgeous things that were in the River Road area and Bethel area that are no longer known to us, and that's a shame. So the tale of two cities, Bethel being like the stepsister, so to speak, or the ignored part, and the focus going to mostly what we now consider downtown and South Eugene. In fact, we knew there was a problem, a differential in Bethel, Danebo area and the Eugene area, because in a 1979 planning report for what was then dubbed the West Eugene industrial area, city staff already noted in writing in their report that West Eugene had too much blight, and there was a lot of dumping of trash. There was the development of strip malls. There were junkyard, auto junkyards, unsightly materials, strewn places. There was no screening from the wood products industries. There were a number of traffic hazards and a lot of deaths on Highway 99. And that highways were separating the feeling of community in these neighborhoods. These things were already known. But because of decisions made in the 70s and 80s, now West Eugene, Bethel Danebo area has 99% of all reported air toxic emissions in the city of Eugene, because the emphasis was placed on locating heavy industry there, but also residential neighborhoods. So I'm going to take you through two case studies, just so you feel a little grounded in some of the history of the area. So the first case study is the old Bethel School in what was then called the Bethel Triangle, that we now call today Train Song neighborhood. And it is shaped like a triangle, and it is in Councilor Syrett's ward, Ward 7. And this Bethel School went from being a vibrant community center to a rail yard to an industrial site. So here's one of the old maps I located, and in the middle, to orient you, here is the Highway 99, and here's the old railroad. And this triangle shape here, kind of a strange triangle shape, is the Bethel Triangle or Train Song neighborhood. Right in the middle was the Bethel School. It is so prominent. It's like the only thing on this map other than some street names. I put in J.H. Baxter, just so you get a sense of the proximity. And if you notice, there's these wetlands drawn in here, right where J.H. Baxter, the facility that makes creosote, telephone ties, and telephone poles and railroad ties. So the Bethel School was actually put on that location in 1926. And it was known for its high caliber of curriculum. It was the community place for all events. It had a vibrant after-school program. It was used for picnics and games, and the community really gravitated there. However, when this area was annexed by the city, it was torn down. And there was a hue and a cry from the community. People wanted to save this building. It really meant something to them and to their community, but it was torn down and I couldn't find any photographs of it. In speaking to people who lived in the area during these years, I did a lot of interviews, of folks who have, some of them were born in Train Song and still live there. And they talked to me about what a warm, inviting neighborhood it was. And they had grocery stores, they had the school, kids played everywhere. They didn't fear going out or being impacted by the industry at that point. Instead, they felt a real strong sense of community and they chose to live there because it was affordable, but it was also felt like home, felt like a community. Here's an aerial map from 1947 and the yellow circle is the where the school is located, kind of near Moore Street there. But this land that you see here was all converted to industrial uses. And in fact, at one point, the rail yard that you see here was narrower, but it was expanded and lengthened to go all the way up to Irving Street area. In the 1982 Bethel-Danable refinement plan, the staff had made a point to say that the intention of the plan was to keep industrial development from impacting housing. However, that didn't turn out to be quite the way it worked out. And you can see here in the 1960s that there's a lot of small land use plots along Pacific Highway or Highway 99 there. And in these places were restaurants and small mom and pop businesses, grocery stores. People felt they could just go out for a Saturday night and go dancing and have dinner. It felt connected. And the streets were developing with all the houses. Again, Bethel School seems to be this prominent landmark to the map makers there. But despite the staff's intention to sort of keep industrial uses out of the area, as I said, the school was torn down and those streets were converted into industrial use. I remember when there was a Red Cross Center there that we used for many community meetings. That's gone. And Train Song Park is sort of sandwiched in between the railroad spur there, which services a lot of tanker trucks, as you can see, and the industry. And it was pretty much an undeveloped park until just a few years ago. A second case study is sort of the heart of the original Bethel neighborhood south of Elmira. It was referred to as Eugene's Fringe in a lot of the documents I read, but it turned into the Field of Dreams and then into what I'm calling housing hostage. So I learned when I was talking to people in the Bethel area that there used to be a baseball stadium right now where Coralie Street is and Lark Park. And in this map from aerial photo from 1951, you can see the Bethel baseball stadium known as Bethel Park, where the Larks minor league baseball team played and actually was again an amazingly vibrant community center. Thousands of people gathered there for games. Nearby also is Alva Park, and you can see here the industrial area developing. You can see where the wetlands are that you saw in the old maps that I showed previously, and you can see a lot of housing. So the housing and the community were there at the same time the industries were being built up. It was not just industry first and then the housing. There were schools and housing there before industry and during the conversion of land into industrial spaces. This Bethel baseball stadium was actually dubbed the Field of Dreams, and it attracted the attention of Bobby Doerr, who played for the Red Sox, and Duke Snyder, another famous baseball player, and Ty Cobbs, I think his name was, actually visited there as well. It was really something to behold. But here's another aerial map taken from 1975, when this was considered the fringe of Eugene. The baseball stadium is gone. It was raised in 1966, approximately. And at this point in time, Roosevelt Avenue did not go through to Beltline. It stopped right around what's now Lark Park. And the Northwest Expressway had not yet been built. And at this point in time, the government was doing things like surveys with the industry and putting together the Bethel-Danable refinement plan. And they decided that the main purpose of that plan would be to create large truck corridors to move goods. And so they cut through these neighborhoods. The red line is the Roosevelt Avenue before it was punched through to Beltline, and before Northwest Expressway was built. So there was a heavy emphasis on freight and transportation with very little regard to how that would impact neighborhoods and how those large arterial streets would sort of dice up that sense of community. And here's, I took this screenshot from the 1982 Bethel-Danable refinement plan, where the intent was at one point to provide zoning in conformance with proposed land use patterns. And 1A specifically says to apply a site review for the development of parcels fronting along Roosevelt Boulevard to buffer the adjacent residential development from the effects of arterial traffic. And I would say that despite the fact that this is in the plan, that didn't really come to be, especially if you talk to the people who live right along Roosevelt Avenue. So here's a map in 1986. Again, I just put a little red shading there where Roosevelt is still a dead-end street and the community is pretty intact. And the people I interviewed there, again, said they knew all their neighbors, they visited around, they walked to the various stores on Highway 99, and there was a sense of cohesiveness in this community that I think was lost when Roosevelt Boulevard was widened and extended and became a major thoroughfare that no one in their right mind would try to cross. Originally, interestingly enough, the city had planned to put Highway 126 going from the Jefferson Washington Street overpass all the way over to Roosevelt. So that was going to be the highway. People in the neighborhood told me that there were many public meetings and public hearings, and there was a great outcry against that plan. And so it didn't go through, but the state had certain properties that they owned in preparation for putting the highway right through the middle of Bethel. And this map here is right out of the Bethel-Danable refinement plan, showing one of their preferred alternatives to the transportation issues brought up by the industry. So the highway, as we now know, was not built, but what happened is that state-owned land became the site for low-income housing, along with these shaded areas here where my cursor is, and here became the site for single-wide manufactured homes. Going back to what was there with the Bethel Stadium, there's a picture of the Eugene Larks. And then the Larks team had to disband because of the Korean War and the fact that most young men of all these minor league teams were sent off to fight in the war. So it then became a kind of a community center for football, high school football teams, or I don't know if there's such a thing as minor league football, but anyway, that whatever the equivalent is. So there's an interesting cover of an old program, but I haven't been able to find an actual photograph of the stadium again, which goes back to that map I showed you in the beginning, where downtown Eugene has a lot of historic buildings and a lot of history that's been recorded, but somehow this very crucial center of the community is very difficult to find any information about it. It had a wooden grandstand that could seat 4,800 people and probably looked a lot like Civic Stadium, the one off Willamette Street. And because of the connection with the baseball team, some of the street names are reminiscent of the times from the 50s, 60s, where the stadium was used. And then later on, when Bobby Doerr and Duke Snyder actually came into the neighborhood to sign autographs. So if you can see the street name there, here's a sign, the two signs where the streets merge and are named after these famous baseball players. It's a wonderful part of Eugene's history. In the 1990s, Netco either purchased or was given that land that had been owned by the state in preparation for punching the highway through. That didn't happen. And so I just want to credit the family there on the right, Tammy and Jessica, who alerted me to the history of the old baseball stadium there. I'd never heard of it before. But one thing they also shared with me, along with a number of neighbors who were the original homeowners of this Coralie Lark Park area, is that they bought their homes with the idea that this would be their starter home. It was the only thing they could afford. They were actually required to take classes in home ownership from NEDCO, and it was considered to be, like the place a low-income person could get their start. But the homes actually devalued in price, and those who tried to sell lost money, and those who couldn't afford to lose money are still there. And that's why I called it the housing hostage, because I talked to a lot of people who are desperate to move because, or they were, especially when J.H. Baxter was in operation, because they couldn't use their backyards. They felt nauseous just going out of the door and going to work in the morning from the vapors and the fumes from the nearby industry. And also they found that the quality of the housing was very poor, and there's significant problems with mold and other things that they described. So, it became a place where people feel stuck, like they can't move on because the property is devalued once Roosevelt Boulevard was built and the industry was allowed to expand in the area. And here's an aerial photograph of J.H. Baxter, which is right behind those homes I just showed. Very heavy industry with a huge impact on a large swath of the surrounding neighborhood, including a groundwater plume that goes right underneath the homes in some of those neighborhoods, and the recent finding of dioxin in the homes across the street from the J.H. Baxter plant. This, you might be already aware that the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality is testing homes in the area for dioxin and has found levels that are too high for human health and safety. So now we have many industries in the area. Here's a kind of a map of West Eugene. Here's Beltline there curving around, and the diagonal line is Highway 99. And the circles indicate industries that are ranked according to their health risk by our state regulators. So the red circles indicate industries that are extremely risky, either cancer or non-cancer health risks for the surrounding neighborhoods. Orange is sort of medium risk, yellow and green down from there. But you can see this concentration of industry in West Eugene, very, very little, if any, in Central or South Eugene. So hopefully that was a great start off of our conversation about what it was like, what it is now, and how we're going to move forward.
That was great, Lisa.
Thanks, Robin.
Yes, Lisa, thank you so much. I think that is a perfect lead into the rest of the conversation. I want to make sure that if folks do have questions for Lisa, either now or later when you think about something, you're welcome to put those in the chat. And as I said, we will try to our best ability to answer as many questions as we can. So this moves us on into our counselors. I would like to go ahead and allow Councilor Syrett to speak with us this evening. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take myself off speaker view though, because I don't want to watch myself while I talk. Well, thank you, Lisa, and your awesome Beyond Toxic staff for organizing this forum with Councilor Groves and myself tonight. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to generate a conversation around these important work sessions that the City Council is going to be holding over the next several months on looking at our authorities around regulating chronic toxic polluters, and that's air, water, soil, and also noise or other disturbances, as well as looking at whether or not we want to require risk bonds. And Laura from the Sustainability Commission is going to speak to that in more depth. And then the idea of creating a public health overlay zone framework that could be applied to different parts of our city. And Lisa will speak a little bit more to what that conceptually looks like. I really want to thank Lisa for taking us through that history and grounding us in how this particular part of our city has been treated or perhaps mistreated in terms of planning and development. It's very important for us to know this history because it is a legacy that has obvious ramifications for these neighborhoods right now today. And I just wanted to comment on that plan about Highway 126. And thank goodness that that effort was squashed. But what did happen is we got an on-ramp, off-ramp that split the Whitaker neighborhood in two, destroyed a whole section of Whitaker housing, and has left what I would consider a big nuisance in the middle of my neighborhood. I live in Whitaker, and that is an additional legacy. And I actually have some ideas about trying to get rid of that on-ramp and off-ramp. Apparently, there was funding in the most recent infrastructure bill to address historical legacies of that kind. And I've started talking to the city manager about it, but that's a digression. I also just wanted to note that my Ward 7 includes a little bit of downtown and a little bit of Bethel. So out to like Peterson Barn, basically. So I was asked to speak a little bit to the political process for City Council considering and adopting any of these policies, whether it's regulating toxic polluters, requiring risk bonds, or creating a public health overlay zone. So in this case, Councilor Groves and I collaborated on the risk bond work session poll, and he did the chronic polluters work session poll. And then I put a motion out at a city council meeting on the public health overlay zone. And so those are all means for us to get a work session on the calendar. And in this case, I'm very grateful that our council colleagues approved those work session polls and the public health overlay zone motion unanimously in that case. And so then it becomes incumbent on the city manager to find a time on our agenda to have a work session. And we rely on our city staff then to bring forward information around these topics so that we can have an informed conversation about them. Now, some of these, like the chronic polluters and the public health overlay zone, we're going to just dig into them for the first time at the first work session. And so a lot of questions are going to come up from counselors. And then most likely we will say we want to have a second work session so we can get those answers and we can continue the conversation. And then typically if we're finding that there is political will and we have the authorities, it's very possible that we would then craft an ordinance that would, in the case of the chronic polluters, articulate what regulations we want to impose on and on whom, or what kind of industry, and then that would get referred to a public hearing. And I believe that would be the same process for the fossil fuel risk bonds and the public health overlay zone. So that's kind of, a very quick summary of how our process works for getting a topic in front of council, getting it debated, getting the information we need, putting it out to a public hearing where the public can give us input on it, say they love this part, they don't like that part. Then council can deliberate again and make some modifications. If we make modifications that are too dramatic, we might have to have a second public hearing. And then we, at some point, call the question, do we want to pass this ordinance? I just want to speak to the public health overlay zone is a concept that our mayor began a conversation about, and I decided we just needed to dive in. And this was really prompted in large part by the revelations out of J.H. Baxter and also the dioxin that was found in Trainson Park, and really coming to a realization, and also thanks to the great work of Beyond Toxics to educate more folks in the community that, we need to be taking some steps as a city to find the tools to address some of these issues and put a spotlight on certain parts of our community that have been underserved, ignored, and in some cases, you could say abused by the allowance of industry adjacent to residential areas. And so a public health overlay zone in concept could create a lens by which the city council could assess the public health with certain metrics of a particular neighborhood or part of the community and say, all right, this rises to the level where we need to take some action. So that could be actions that say, we're disallowing any future industrial usage, within this area. I would even envision we might limit current industrial uses if we had the power to do that, or find ways to mitigate the impacts. I also worked for a time for an organization that was trying to address childhood obesity rates. And I could see a public health overlay zone looking at the idea of access to healthy food. Lisa mentioned, Four Corners. There, when I moved to Eugene, there was a Winco at Four Corners where the Lane County Parole and Probation offices have just been built. And so access to healthy foods is a public health imperative. So I see a lot of potential in this concept beyond just industrial pollution control. And I want to just kind of wrap up to say, an example of this city council taking action in a public health framework is the downtown smoking ban that we implemented. Now, we implemented that in part at the behest of Lane County Public Health, who was doing their due diligence around trying to reduce smoking. Tobacco-related deaths, I believe, were either the first or second highest preventable deaths we had in Lane County. And public health sorry, I was distracted by the chat there for a second, someone correcting me on effect. It has been shown that by making it more difficult to take your cigarette break, actually reduces people smoking. And so because we have this downtown zone, it was a kind of obvious location that we could take some action and say, you know what, we're going to disallow smoking within this boundary. Now, we did allow some businesses to opt out, and there's some loopholes, but in effect, it was a public health effort to try to reduce smoking, to improve public health, that the city council took action on. So I think that's can be used as kind of an example of a past situation where we did that. So I'm going to stop there. I look forward to the Q&A, and thank you so much again for having us here this evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Councilor Syrett. I think that there will be some questions for you at the end there. And I did see that somebody said Roosevelt, the Winco wasn't there, Four Corners or something, and we'll address that towards the end. So I think we're going to move on to Councilor Groves, and let's hear what you have to say tonight.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you Beyond Toxics for having us here tonight and for hosting these forums that have been going on, with DEQ, with Oregon Health Division, with LRAPA. This is also critically important to the health and welfare of our community. I also want to thank Councilor Syrett for really being a good partner in a lot of this, and her experience has been invaluable as we've been trying to respond to the problems that have appeared before us. But I thought it was really interesting and really set the stage well with the history lesson that Lisa gave us and the Eugene civics lesson that Claire gave us, because it kind of sets the frame for the environment that we're operating in. And I think that it's important that we understand that. One of the nice things about going third, most of the important information has already been said, and that's absolutely fine. I'll try to get through my piece here fairly quickly, but I do want to touch on the 3 work sessions that I think are incredibly important. And I know my colleague Claire agrees with that. And I think the council demonstrated that by stepping up and having unanimous support to move these issues forward. I don't want to get too deep into the risk bonds because I know Laura is going to speak what those are. I think it's also important to understand that some of the things that are coming forward were actual recommendations that also came out of our Sustainability Commission, which is important. I also want to go back and explain too, I've had a long relationship with Lisa, going back a number of years in my former life with the fire department and the Toxics Right to Know program. And she is such an invaluable resource to have in this community, and the work she does and the tireless effort that she puts into this. She is a valued partner, and I think she is really, I know she's helped me a lot with some of that technical expertise, and it's actually feeling a little bit rewarding, even though we haven't accomplished anything yet as a city council on this particular issue, but we're poised to do that, and that's what is important. But to kind of frame these a little bit, the risk bonds, and I am quite hopeful that we can extend that for more than just the fossil fuels and try to get, or at least build on that for things like J.H. Baxter that are toxins, because they are threatening our community. And, right now, as we're all aware, there's J.H. Baxter's claiming an inability to pay for the damage that's been done. Well, the risk bonds, that's something that will help with this. Likewise, the health overlay zone. It's not just keeping industry from locating next to neighborhoods and schools and parks and hospitals and things like that. It's also keeping neighborhoods from being built around existing industry. It's a buffer zone. It's creating a margin of safety for our community. Another thing that I did in my career was I was on our first Eugene Fire Department hazardous materials team, and then as we merged and became part of the state system, Eugene Springfield now staffs one of I believe it's down to 10 regional hazardous materials teams in the state. And so that's a really important tool that we have here at our disposal. But trying to deal with and seeing some of these toxins that not only are just used in our community, but we have millions of tons and gallons of these products shipped through our community, whether it's up and down I-5 or whether it's on the rail line that comes through here. In fact, I almost put a slide behind me, but I didn't want to be gratuitous about it, but is of a LOX truck that pulled off of, actually it was hydrogen, and it pulled off of I-5 because that's like a thermos truck that goes down the street, and the inner seal broke. And so they pulled off right onto I-105. And if that had gone off, that could have taken out, a half-mile square. And that's serious stuff that we have coming through our community and communities up and down the I-5 corridor every day. In fact, many times every day. Those are the types of things that used to keep me up at night as the fire chief. So this is something that I think is incredibly important. I look forward to working on. And then the last piece I wanted to touch on was the tools and strategies for addressing toxic polluters. I would characterize that work session as exploratory because I don't think we have a good sense for what power we have or could have as a municipality. Our regulatory authorities in this area are really DEQ, LRAPA. Oregon Health is more of an advisory capacity. And then of course you have EPA at the federal level. But the reality is we want to know what we can do as a city. Again, there's things we can do proactively in the future around zoning, but we want to know what tools we have or could have to address things like we're experiencing with the dioxin poisonings right now, because it really felt, and I'll speak for myself here, but Councilor Syrett certainly able to weigh in, but I felt very helpless in this process. We're seeing members of our community suffer. And I lived for 8 years, I lived on Wood Avenue. So I get it. I remember smelling the byproducts of industry daily. And it's more than just J.H. Baxter. I mean, that's the one that we think of as the poster child for the problem. But it goes beyond that. And when the wind changes, you pick up different smells from different industries, and people that live out here understand what I'm saying. So I look forward to finding out what we can do as a city, how we can be more effective and take one of our highest charges, and that's protecting the health, welfare, and safety of the people who live, work, or even pass through Eugene. So thank you for allowing us to be here tonight, and I appreciate everybody who's attending tonight to hear this and hopefully weigh in with some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Groves. That was really awesome explanation and great segue into what Laura Allen is going to be talking about. I do see there's some questions and comments going on in the chat. I appreciate that. And as I said before, we will try to answer as many questions as we can tonight. So let's talk to Laura Allen. Take it away, Laura.
Thanks, Archery. Thank you everyone for being here. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what is a risk bond. This term has been shared a few times from different people tonight. And previous to a little more than a year and a half ago, I had never heard of a risk bond. So I'm guessing that many of you haven't heard of that. It's when you understand what it is, it's very common sense. So basically it's a policy program to protect the public's finances. You're all aware that these fossil fuel industries, as well as toxic polluters, they have a big impact on human health, and they also have a big impact on our finances, the community's finances, because it's very expensive to deal with the legacy of these polluters as well as potential disasters. So there's kind of two costs that we encounter from these fossil fuel companies as well as toxic polluters. There's the disaster. Councilor Groves, referenced a potential disaster like an explosion. There could be, oil train wreck. There could be abandoned infrastructures, another not exactly a disaster, but it's a kind of a one-time incident that happens. It has a very large financial cost associated with it. And then there's the climate change costs. So climate change is not as, you can't just pinpoint it down to one person, one incident, one day, you know, one wreck, but it contributes to, you know, fires and droughts and extreme weather and like really big costs that communities have to take on. And so when things go wrong, be it a disaster like an explosion or a, you know, forest fire or wildfire, the federal government, you know, state agencies, local agencies, they're the ones picking up the tabs to pay for that. And we as taxpayers are the ones that really ultimately pay. So the polluters are not paying for the harm that they're causing to our communities. And so risk bond is a strategy. It's one way that governments can help address this problem and start shifting the financial cost back onto the people who are causing the problem or the industries that are causing this problem. And so this strategy came out of this organization called the Center for Sustainable Economies. And John Talbot, one of the people who works there and who coined the term, I believe he coined the term risk bonds, and wrote a paper about it and explained how to do it. He came to Eugene via Zoom last year and spoke to the Sustainability Commission, and some of the councilors were there, did a presentation about it. So we learned about it and learned how this could potentially be implemented in Eugene. There's kind of two approaches with risk bonds. The first approach is using existing conventional financial assurances like insurance. If you want somebody to work on your house, you hire a contractor, they have to have insurance, liability insurance, to address any potential problem they could cause by accident to your home. A company who has storage of millions of gallons of flammable material, they don't necessarily have to have the same insurance that could cover whatever potential thing could go wrong. And so a risk bond program could use existing assurances to require these risky industries to be able to address financially the worst case scenario. So that's kind of one strategy. Bonding, you know, insurance, that kind of strategy. Then the other strategy would be creating a surcharge on any transaction or any movement of these toxic fuels or carbon emitting fuels that are contributing to climate change. And that surcharge would go into a risk fund. And then that fund could be used to pay for things like transitioning to clean energy, like mitigating problems that, you know, that come up, whatever that may be, as well as dealing with drought and storm and fire and all those other things that, you know, the cost is really coming from certain industries. So those are the two approaches, the requiring insurance or getting money based on the doing business in this community and using that money to address the potential problem. Kind of the first step is to figure out what are these industries currently insured for? Like what are they covered for in case there is a disaster? And right now we don't really know. They're not required to tell anyone. Nobody's keeping track of what level of insurance they have if there was a disaster. So there's really a huge question mark around some of these biggest fossil fuel companies and probably the toxic emitters, though I'm not sure about that. Lisa, you probably know. The community really doesn't know what they're covered for. And so once we can find out, then we could see, is there a gap and addressing that potential gap. So that's kind of basically what a risk bond is and how it could potentially work in Eugene. And I'm looking forward to further conversations about it, and I'll be here for questions.
Thank you so much, Laura. I think that there probably will be some questions just because a risk bond is sort of a hard thing to understand what it is. So there probably will be some questions for you at the end. So I appreciate you wanting to stay to be able to answer those questions. We are going to have Lisa talk to us for a few minutes about a public overlay zone, and then we're going to get into question and answer. And I do see that we have some questions filling up here in the chat. So we will get to answering those as soon as we can. Lisa?
Thank you, Audrey. And I'll be really brief. Councilors Syrett already explained quite a bit about a public health overlay zone. Just to add a little more information, in 2017, the city of Eugene adopted the Clear Lake overlay zone for new industrial lands that were being brought into the city limit out near where Highway 99 and Clear Lake Avenue, I guess it is, meet. And There was a concern at the time that we didn't want to repeat the patterns the city had allowed or not stopped anyway in the past of citing industry close to homes, schools, and parks. The Clear Lake Overlay Zone is also called the Environmental Justice Overlay Zone. And it has a number of components that are really unique and that other cities should probably be taking note of. And I think Crystal's going to put in the chat the link to the actual city codes. You can read it yourself. But the public health overlay zone is sort of like a blanket on top of existing bedrock of land use code and zoning. It has certain requirements in it. The purpose of a overlay zone for public health would be to protect public health, also to create fairness and equity, and to set certain restrictions and guidelines to avoid incompatibility with industry emissions, vibrations, noise, or other impacts with homes, schools, and parks. So it doesn't mean there can't be industry. It just means we need to really, for the first time, use criteria related to public health. And that is currently not something that's in any of our laws exactly, when it comes to land use anyway. So some of the things a public health overlay zone would require is a ability for people to give comment. So neighborhood meetings with the city, with the industry, and with the nearby neighborhood. It would also require a pre-clearance letter from the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency. It would require the proof of a risk bond that Laura just helped us understand. Thank you, Laura. So these would be things that would happen in advance of any kind of permit or permission. Then there would be certain development standards related to, for example, lighting. How much lighting would there be? How would it impact nearby neighborhoods? Would it prevent people from sleeping? What about buffer zones between industries and homes? As we saw in the Roosevelt case study, the city staff talked about putting in buffer zones, but then it didn't really happen other than expanding the width of Roosevelt Avenue and calling it a buffer zone. There might be things like a land use compatibility statement. Right now, the Department of Environmental Quality does require a city to issue a land use compatibility statement prior to a permit of a polluter. And so the city can use that already mandated procedure to really take a deep look at how land use decisions impact public health. And it's up to the city to develop its own criteria for that. Right now, that is a underused tool that the city has. And there could be public uses that are, industrial uses that are prohibited. So for example, maybe we would not allow a slaughterhouse, I'm just making that up, or a pesticide manufacturer, or a garbage dump, or a landfill near home. So the city could identify certain industries are just incompatible to have within the city limits. So that's sort of how a public overlay zone would work. We have the Clear Lake Overlay Zone as a really great example. Beyond Toxics worked with the city to help craft that, and it went all the way up to the Land Use Board of Appeals and was approved. So we know it's a good one. And so now it's up to us all to develop what might be something we can really be proud of that will wisely use our land and protect our public health.
Perfect. That's excellent, Lisa. That's a good explanation about exactly what it is and what it can do for the community. And I think that there's some questions about that. Are we ready for Q&A? Okay. There is a question from Kathy Eastland. She says, do you have a list like this for Springfield as well? I'm not sure what list you're talking about, Kathy. Okay, Lisa.
She put that up while Lisa was going over the toxic polluter sites in Eugene.
Okay,
Mhm. Thank you for
thank
that,
you.
for that question. Yes, we do. Well, we could have a map of that. We're ready to have a map of that. We were preparing for this presentation tonight, so I focused on Eugene. But yes, we have all the data and we can do it.
Excellent. Did that answer your question, Kathy?
I guess, Crystal, you can unmute people who are asking questions, or people can raise their hand and you can be unmuted. We hope to talk to you.
Okay, she says there in the chat, yes, thanks. Okay, thank you for that question, Kathy, and thanks for answering it, Lisa. We also have a question from Lori Traeger. I hope I said your last name right. Forgive me if I didn't. Question from Lori Traeger. She has a question for Councilor Syrett.
Thank you, Archery. It's Trigger, just think trees. And I'm also your Lane County Commissioner. And of course, the county is your Board of Public Health and your public health authority. And so I can't speak for the board, but I'm really interested in this work. The organization that Councilor Syrett mentioned working for on child obesity prevention was an organization that I led for 5 years and hired Councilor Syrett before she was Councilor Syrett, who then took on that organization. And at that time, actually did a bus tour Beyond Toxics that Lisa led that was really impactful, looking at childhood asthma rates and the frequency of asthma and child obesity being co-occurring in the Trainsong neighborhood. Did a lot of work in Trainsong, and particularly a lot of work around healthy food access and sort of looking at this healthy nutrition zoning kind of work. As Councilor Syrett mentioned, there used to be grocery stores all up and down that Highway 99 corridor. Now there's a cosmic bowling and all kinds of other things that, but I'm really interested in this public health overlay zone. And I think we're at a really important time. Human behavior, it requires both culture change and policy change, and each thing has to happen. And sometimes one starts the ball rolling and the other follows, and sometimes vice versa. But I think we're at a really important place of people recognizing the climate chaos, the toxic polluters and industry overreach, and the lack of how many people are lacking basic needs being met. And this is a real opportunity, I think, to bring all those pieces together, right? To preserve farmland, whether that's to keep too much sprawl development, whether it's to keep polluters out of the groundwater and the air. But I will be really curious to learn more as you move forward on the public health overlay. And I hope you'll try starting out as broad and aggressive as possible, including things like density for things like gas stations. We have a housing crisis, and then we take buildable land close to our city center, like at 7th and Polk, and we put another 7-Eleven on it, even though there's probably 4 gas stations within a quarter mile of that already, for example. So I think this idea of not just an overlay zone, but looking at density and proximity, how many is enough gas stations in the city's core? How far should any one household have to go before they can get to a full service grocery? How many drive-throughs and fast food restaurants should be loaded into one neighborhood? So I think, we put rules in place about proximity to schools when it comes to dispensaries and adult bookstores. I think we could kind of reverse engineer that when it comes to things like grocery stores and so on. So really excited about the work that the city is taking on. Really excited to offer whatever connection to our public health folks and shared learnings we can do between the county and the city. So thank you so much for this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Trieger. I'm really pleased you're able to join us and provide that input. Yes, and so it's a little awkward that the city is looking at a public health overlay zone because, as Commissioner Trieger pointed out, the county is the public health authority for our county. But I think there's real value in the city looking at this, and I have every intention of encouraging my council colleagues to be as expansive with the idea as possible. And I think the example of the gas stations is an excellent one. So, we have received a lot of input, like, why are you putting in another gas station? Well, first of all, the city's not putting in the gas stations, right? Private property owners are doing that. And right now, they are allowed by code on those lots. And so the city council has no role in approving or denying those. That goes through a land use action, if necessary, that goes through our planning commission. But if they're allowed by code, then they're allowed and people get to build them. And so this overlay zone concept could give us the ability to say, all right, let's look at that allowance. And is there a mechanism we could put in there, as Commissioner Trieger has suggested, that says, there's a concentration here, or we're adding to a concentration that is an unhealthy level, and therefore it is not allowed in this case. So I think those are really intriguing ideas, and I really appreciate you adding them to the conversation.
Thank you. And just so folks who are listening know, the reason the county isn't necessarily doing this is we can't impose those kinds of things on a city within Lane County. But if a city takes it up and then maybe another city takes it up and you reach a sort of critical mass, then there can become a time for the county to do, like we've done with the tobacco prevention work, as Councilor Syrett mentioned, we can then do countywide actions when enough cities are sort of on board, but we can't come in as the county and create those requirements for the cities, the incorporated cities.
Audrey, if it's okay, I just was going to share my screen so briefly to show you a map that Beyond Toxics has put together for our city council, showing the location of gas stations and how long it would take you to reach a gas station from any point in the city limits. And as you can see, it would only take less than 5 minutes to get to any gas station in the city. So I believe Councillor Keating might be talking to his fellow city councilors about what we can do to stop this proliferation of gasoline stations when we're trying to move off fossil fuels.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Lisa. It was great input there. Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. I didn't realize that you were a commissioner. I would have addressed you as such. So thank you very much for being here and for your input with what Councilor Syrett has to talk about with the public overlay zone. So thank you very much for that and explaining why the city can't just jump in and do stuff. So thank you. Randy,
Randy's fine. No, I just wanted, actually, Lisa started to address it. There is a work session poll out right now from Councilor Keating on the gas station issue, but Councilor Syrett is correct. We keep hearing from people, how can you approve all these gas stations? We don't approve them. It's just an automatic part of the code, but we're going to talk about that. In fact, I actually think it could be probably worked into one of our other 3 work sessions, but we do need to have that discussion because I don't think any of us have missed what's going on in our community. And I too want to thank Commissioner Trieger for being here. And I also want to recognize, I believe I saw Councilor Emily Semple that's tuned into this as well. So thank you to Emily for being here.
yes, thank you. Thank you, Randy. We have more questions here. Question from Stephen Fuller Rowell, wanting to know who's collecting the data from the monitoring equipment on Figaro and what data is being collected by the wind direction device on top of the building that houses Cascade Custom Chemical on North Oak.
It's Figueroa is the location. Sorry, Marjorie.
I'm not sure who is to answer that question.
I'm not aware of those monitoring devices, so maybe we can talk afterwards.
I can say, I don't know specifically what those monitoring devices are, but they are not always government devices that are out there. Sometimes industry itself has passive monitoring devices set up that can trigger alarms if there's a release, or at least they can go back and forensically reconstruct if there was a release, kind of how it progressed. El Rapa does have some passive air monitoring devices, but I believe the closest one to our area is on Highway 99, if I'm correct on that. The concern I have with those is they just take too long to get any results back. I mean, they have to manually take what's pulled in, send it off to a lab, and then it's at least 3 weeks. And that's not real time. So anyway, that's something to be talked about as well. And I've mentioned that to the city council representative to El Rapa, who is Matt Keating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Stephen, if you want to put your information there in the chat, and if you have any more questions you think that Lisa might be able to answer, if you wanted to talk about this further, go ahead and put your information in there in the chat. You can send it directly to myself or to Beyond Toxics, and we'll make sure that Lisa gets that.
Great. Thanks for the suggestion.
Thank you very much. Coming up on another question from Misty Frost. Hi, Misty. We haven't actually met in person, but hi. A question from Misty. She says, would this new overlay be similar to the environmental justice rules implemented in the new Eugene Urban Growth Bounty project being implemented?
I'll take that one on. I think that, yes, there's a connection between the Clear Lake Overlay Zone, which is also called the Environmental Justice Overlay Zone. Again, I urge you to read the ordinance there. It has all the wording in it. It talks about environmental justice, it talks about climate impacts, it talks about protecting wetlands. So it's a great model. I sit on the, the Urban Growth Boundary Technical Advisory Committee for the City of Eugene. And I can say in that process, we do not have climate criteria and we do not have environmental justice criteria. And it's sort of like set in stone. When I bring those things up, I just kind of get a, no, those aren't part of our criteria. So that's a little frustrating for me. But the staff is a great team on that Technical Advisory Committee.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Misty, do you feel like you got your question answered? Excellent. Thank you. We're going to keep on going here. Got a question from Tiffany Monroe. Can you provide a technical definition of chronic toxic polluters? Who is identified as a chronic toxic polluter in Eugene?
I'll take that one since I wrote the work session. I'm hoping we get that defined through the process. I think there needs to be some objective standard, but in my mind, when I wrote that, it would apply to recurring, frequently cited industry. You know, again, J.H. Baxter's kind of the poster of this, where there's, you know, how many times have they been cited by DEQ for violations, and they just kept happening. So trying to find a tool set that can address industry that's not correcting itself, that's not taking measures that actually stop the releases. That was my intent. It's you know, we have industry that's also responsible out there and manages their products well, but when we have those that don't, what are our tools for addressing it? So again, I think a final definition that will hopefully come out of the work session or work sessions, depending how in depth we get into it, and looking for some technical help from our legal staff and our planning staff as we go in and start working on this.
And I'll add, we don't know who our chronic toxic polluters are. I mean, that's part of the issue, right? Like, that's not something the city government has been tracking. And so this is an opportunity for us to get that information and be aware of it and do something about it.
Sorry. Thank you, counselors, for answering that question. Thank you, Tiffany, for your question. That's a really good question, actually. So thank you for asking that. Another question we have from James Hugo. He says, what about noise pollution concerns?
I'd like to address that because I've had some issues in my ward. So the toxic polluters work session encompassed noise pollution, but we also have a situation with a manufacturer who's currently running a piece of equipment on 12-hour shifts. So we do have a code around, an ordinance around decibel levels for industry and for residents, right? I can't blast my stereo above a certain decibel level where I could be subject to a complaint. But we have a manufacturer who's running a piece of equipment that does not violate the decibel level limitations in terms of sound, but is creating a vibration that travels through the air, as vibrations do, and through the ground, and vibrates people's windows, vibrates their bodies if they're outside, and has created a real challenge for folks in the path of that vibration. And our code enforcement has been trying to work with that manufacturer to mitigate the harm, but our code doesn't address it. And so, the city manager and I asked Randy if we could add that kind of nuance piece into the chronic toxic polluters work session. And he said, of course. So that will be included in the conversation for that topic.
Excellent. That's great. That's a great question, James. Thanks for asking that. Good to have you here too, by the way. Also, another question from Kelly Eastland. She says, I live in West Springfield and I would love to propose them to my city council. Not to hijack the conversation, but does Beyond Toxics have any plans to expand these efforts across the river?
Well, I guess I'll take that one. We would love to work with communities in Springfield, absolutely. And we welcome email or a call, and we can put maybe Audrey's email in there, or you can also always email info@beyondtoxics.org and it will reach us. And yes, we know there's some significant pollution problems in Springfield, and happy to help.
Great, thank you. I was trying to look at the chat and my questions over here. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted. A question from Misty Frost. She says, I wonder if El Rapa would have a list of air polluters in Springfield. I think we might have answered that. Lisa, did you say that we maybe have?
Yeah, as part of the state's air regulatory system, referred to as Cleaner Air Oregon, all industries have to submit emission inventories. El Rapa, Lane Regional Air Protection Authority, is the regulating air quality authority in Lane County. So they do collect all that information. The DEQ also puts things online, emission inventories. So you can request information from El Rapa. There's also the Eugene Toxics Right to Know database, and maybe we can put that in the chat too, which is an invaluable, or I should say very valuable, source of information, one of a kind in the nation. And together with Cleaner Air Oregon, the Eugene Toxics Right to Know databases, you should have a really complete set of information.
That's great, Lisa.
Oh, and we would just like to say that the Eugene Toxics Right to Know program is run by the Eugene Fire Marshal's Office. Randy probably has more information about that, but we would love to see it extended to Springfield, have Springfield also adopt the same kind of thing. And also to Lane County, where some of the biggest polluters are actually on county land and not in a city limit.
Great. Thank you, Misty. Thank you. I think Kelly said that was her question, but thank you. Whomever asked that question, thank you very much. We also have a question from James New. And again, I'm sorry if I butchered your last name. He asks, fossil fuel risk bonds, largest potential polluters are Union Pacific Railroad hauling hazardous chemicals and Kinder Morgan high pressure liquid petroleum line that feeds the Prairie Road Tank Farm in Portland. Councilor Groves does I'm sorry, I don't know. Councilor Groves, does the fire department ever take time to, I'm sorry, I can't, this question is a little bit.
I know what he's talking about. Every
Okay,
time a train
thank you.
comes into town with greater than 35 tank cars,
Right,
the local fire department is supposed to be notified. I don't know what they're doing now. I've been out of the game for, well, May 1st will be 6 years. But even when I was still chief, we were notified hit and miss when they did come through. But the reality is, no matter how many cars they have, if there's an accident, we're going to respond. The knowledge up front doesn't help as much as being able to get quick access to what the cars are carrying at the time of an event. Now, fortunately, when the oil trains started up, they had mixed loads. So you could have an oil car next to methyl ethyl bad stuff. But now oil trains are single load trains. So they're all the same product. Granted, especially if it's Bakken fuel, which comes out of the Dakotas, it's actually explosive, very volatile, and we run that right through our sensitive environmental areas, down the Columbia Gorge, down through Portland, down through Salem, down through Eugene, heavy population centers, and then back up the headwaters of the Willamette. So that's something that's always made me nervous. In fact, while I was still fire chief, we had a summit that Senators Wyden and Merkley attended, along with a number of state representatives. And I partnered at the time with Portland's fire chief, Aaron Janssens, to try to come up with reduced speeds through sensitive environmental areas and population centers, because the slower a train's going, the less likely it is to have a derailment or an accident. And then we also were fighting to change the type of tank cars that were being used for the product. And although we didn't get the old cars taken off the tracks, which was our goal, we did have a phase out period. So that some of those cars should be off now that we're still on when I was still chief. So that's a little update on what's going on there. Speaking to the tank farms with Kinder Morgan, when I was on our hazmat team, we drilled out there frequently because it was a part of our response area for regional hazmat. But technically, that's not in the city of Eugene, and it's not a city of Eugene Eugene Springfield Fire Response. It's a Lane Fire Authority response. But if there's much of anything going on there, we'd be responding in. As far as the seismic upgrades and protections, I don't think that facility has been hardened. I can't say anything that's happened since I left, but even up to the time I left, I don't think much had been done to strengthen the piping, the valving, or the tanks themselves. And also with storage tanks like that, you also have built-in diking material that's supposed to be able to handle the maximum capacity of each tank. So I can't answer that as far as the seismic upgrades. I know there's a bill at the state level that's going to start working on that, but I have no idea where Kinder Morgan site would be in the priority list. So did that answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, so that basically what you're saying is the county is responsible for the any upgrades or mandating upgrades to that tank farm. Is that correct?
As of right now, that would be my understanding of it. Yes. Unless something, again, if something's changed, 6 years is a long time to be away. And I, quite frankly, when I retired after almost 37 years, I unplugged for a while. Now I'm back in at a different level, and I still care deeply about this, but I just wanted to detach for a bit and kind of focus on some other things for a while.
Congratulations. I'm glad you did that too.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm enjoying the council work. It's a lesson every day.
Right. Well, thanks for your help. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Jim, and thank you, Counselor, for answering it so eloquently. Did a great job. There are a couple more questions here, but I wanted to give folks a chance if they wanted to raise their hand and ask their own question. We're getting here about 8:20, and I really want to be mindful of folks' time. Is there anyone out there? I can't see everyone. Is there someone that would like to raise their hand to ask a question? Robin, I see your hand. You're on mute, Robin.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to clarify. The Kinder Morgan is the tank farm on Prairie Road. Is that what we're talking about? Okay, just clarification. Thank you.
Did you have your hand up again, Robin, or was that an accident?
Accident, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. Dale, got your hand up. I see you there.
Yeah, thank you for this, Lisa, and the people who participated. I'm from Forest Grove, Oregon. And Lisa and Beyond Toxic is a participant partner with Washington County Citizen Action Network, which I'm chair of in Washington County. But I'd like to know your perspective, Lisa, on the governor race and how it impacts DEQ and its ability to work with you on a state level, and how important it is to get somebody elected as the governor so that we continue with Cleaner Air Oregon. That's a political question, but it seems important overall.
Well, Dale, thanks for the compliment. And we are a 501c3, which means we can't engage in anything related to elections and politics. But I can say this, I can say that the current governor, Governor Brown, was instrumental in initiating Cleaner Air Oregon, and that has made a big difference for air quality. But I'll let Councilor Syrett handle this one.
I just had my hand up to be in the queue.
I'm done answering the question.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Councilor Syrett, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Dale, I don't feel knowledgeable enough to proffer a opinion on that, but I will say I am backing our future governor, Tina Kotek. I did see another political question in the in the chat from Misty about kind of asking if we knew where council representatives stood on these issues, and the fact is we don't actually. I mean, there are councilors who have expressed real support for the concept, and we got a unanimous vote on the public health overlay zone work session, so that was great. So I feel like we have some pretty strong support on the council. As Councilor Groves mentioned, Councilor Keating has put forward a work session poll to look at the siting of future gas stations. And I know he certainly has concerns about, environmental impacts of that kind. Councilor Semple is here, and if she wants to speak up for herself, she's certainly capable of doing that, but I know that she also shares concerns, but I will let her speak.
I'm in support of all three of these work sessions. Councillor Keating and I talked about the gas station poll. And so I'm really happy about that. And being on Sustainability Commission, I've helped a lot of comments come forward in support for these. So I'm looking forward to us taking action on all of them. It's essential, as you know, and I do feel that Bethel and the industrial areas really need some more of our attention and energy. Thank you very much for having this meeting. It's been extremely interesting and helpful. I especially loved the historical parts, and it made me ache a little more for what's going on out there. So I'm grateful to all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Simple. We're grateful for you answering that question. Thank you for being here. See, I have several hands up. Let's see, Louisa, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. And I'm grateful that this is happening. I'm a current Sustainability Commissioner, and I guess I just have one question, which is, how can the Sustainability Commission continue to help in this work where it would be our time most usefully spent? And also, what is the strategy for talking beyond ourselves, the group of us who are here because we care about this and we find it really important to overcome those hurdles of folks for whom this will be an enormous sort of challenge, to authority of the city government, to whatever economic challenges might come to the industries being affected, to talk to those who aren't at this meeting, 42 representing 160,000. And I just love to strategize with this community and use the voice of the Sustainability Commission to kind of help pivot beyond City Council to our neighbors. Thanks.
If I could, I'd love to respond, and maybe Randy too. So first, Louisa, thanks so much for being here. You are my appointee to the Sustainability Commission, so it's great to see you. And your question is a perfect opportunity because I was feeling like, oh my goodness, a lot of this is happening because of recommendations from the Sustainability Commission. And I really want to call that out and lift that up, because I know in years past, we've had folks on the Sustainability Commission who felt like they did a lot of work. They made a presentation to council and then nothing happened with it. And I think sometimes it's just, I think as Commissioner Trieger said, the time is ripe. We have a combination of a certain group of councilors, a certain group of very concerned citizens, a very seasoned and capable nonprofit advocacy organization that has really helped us kind of form this. So I think between the work of the Sustainability Commission and Beyond Toxics and other folks in the community has helped us kind of create this focus of attention that was lacking before. And then in terms of, so I think having the members of the Sustainability Commission or the chair remind the City Council that you brought some of these ideas forward to us and that you're very grateful that we're having the work session and you look forward to the outcomes, that kind of dialogue I think is really helpful. And then I'll just say to you what I've said to the folks at Fossil Free Eugene and 350.org, and Jim New has heard me say this. As we look at the electrification work session and the work that furious propaganda efforts from Northwest Natural, there needs to be a certain amount of inoculating our neighbors to say like, hey, this is actually a great idea, or here's how it could benefit you. And so everyone on this call who feels that way, if they can just start talking to other folks and then finding ways to have that conversation at a broader level, is one of the ways that I've asked activists to engage, to kind of help get ahead of the messaging that's going to say this is detrimental, this will end, industry and ruin our economy and all the terrible things that people predict happen when government decides to take some proactive action on things.
If I could just jump in here real quick, I think it's a great question. In my ward, I have a fairly large swath of the West Eugene commercial industrial area, and I'm meeting with business people every day. In fact, 3 today. And I've talked openly about these 3 work sessions, and even people in industry they haven't expressed any problem with it. They understand what happened with J.H. Baxter, and that concerns them as well. In fact, one of the questions that I keep coming up with is, why is the testing only going on the residential side of J.H. Baxter and not to the south? And the answer is, well, because those are industry, people don't live there, but people work there. Workers are people, employees are people. And, when I see business in industry, I see jobs. And, it's important that we have a strong local economy. I mean, we don't run our community or our lives on good intentions. I mean, it takes resources to live. And so, while I certainly support business, I support businesses behaving responsibly. And anybody who's managing their work and their resources responsibly should not have a problem with what we're talking about here. This is about the health, safety, and welfare of our community. And I'll stand up for that with anybody. And I think that we're not alone either. In fact, I know we're not alone. These people care too. A lot of these business owners are our neighbors. They're people, ordinary people just like us. These are not multinational corporations. So I think if we come at this from a human standpoint, we start off with a lot more in common than we have dissimilar. And I think sometimes it's really easy to focus on differences, when I hope that we would focus on similarities and work out from there.
Thank you, counselors, for answering that question. And Louisa, thank you so much for asking that question. I think that as many partners as we can get to help us out in West Eugene is excellent. And, it can help us go beyond. So thank you very much for asking those questions and getting some great answers. So we are right at 8:32. Our meeting is over at 8:30. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I do know that there are a couple questions that we didn't get answered, and there's several comments that had come up in the chat. They're not just going to be disregarded. We're going to look at those. And if there are folks that want to reach out, I don't see anybody's information here, but I have put my email there a couple times in the chat. And you can always look at the Beyond Toxics website and find myself, Lisa, or the folks that are behind the scenes right now that are helping us. So thank you everyone so much for coming here tonight and for asking questions and for using your evening with us, because these types of meetings are very important. And I think that it shows the community that we are really working hard to make sure that things are going to be different out in West Eugene. And like I said, this will help us, not just J.H. Baxter, there's a whole lot of places out that way, but this will help us go further. So thank you very much for everyone being here. Lisa, I don't know if you want to stay after and talk to me for a minute or two, but everyone is free to go. Thank you so much for coming tonight. It was awesome. We appreciate you, counselors. Appreciate you, everyone, for coming tonight. It's awesome.
It was so interesting. I stayed until the end, which is amazing. I thought I'd leave at 8.
Marjorie, thank you so much for being such a wonderful host.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Archie. I thought you did an excellent job.
Oh, thanks.
Excellent.
You guys are too kind. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
all.